And so we are going to be welcoming in the panel right now that is 3D sensors enabling low-cost machine perception. Hype or reality is what we'll be trying to answer today. Just for those of you who are tuning in, I'm Abby. I'm a partner in LDV, and I'm really excited to announce this panel. We've got Hayden Field, who's Emerging Tech reporter at Morning Brew. She's based in New York. She's a business and investigative reporter focusing on tech. Currently, she writes and reports for Emerging Tech Brew, which is a thrice-weekly newsletter and tech features vertical from Morning Brew. We also have Peter Stern. So Peter is the CEO of Voyant Photonics and also a venture partner with us at LDV. He spent the last 25 years creating and growing companies in a wide variety of sectors that span from financial services to social media and now LiDAR on chips. He serves as a CEO of our portfolio company, Voyant Photonics. And then we also have Dragos Machuca. Got it, I think. He is the technical director and senior technical lead at Ford's Research and Innovation Center in Palo Alto. He's an experienced engineer and management professional who's previously worked at BMW, Nissan, Apple, KLA-Tencor, and Lockheed Martin. He's got extensive experience advising startups, developing and commercializing products, and collaborating with universities and leading cross-functional teams. These guys are going to come together to talk about how 3D sensors are enabling low-cost machine perception, and I will let them take it from here.
Thanks so much, Abby. And yeah, we're so excited to be here. Peter and Dragos, excited to dig in. We had a conversation earlier this week about this that was pretty riveting. So excited to dive into whether, the hype, the reality of this, and kind of how far we've come since 2006. Let's start off with, for both of you, what do you believe the single biggest LiDAR progress marker that you can point to since the DARPA challenge in 2006? The single biggest thing that comes to mind when I say that. Peter, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I thought when you first posed this question, I thought it was kind of a stumper because I was focused on the technology aspects of it. And in a lot of ways, what we see now is an evolution of technology that's really existed since the 60s or 70s and just keeps getting slightly better. So I think the real impact of the 2006 DARPA challenge was in demonstrating that you could make like automotive grade, commercial, low cost LiDAR outside of military and esoteric applications. There was LiDAR before Velodyne put those pucks up on their first car, but they really demonstrated these things could be technologies that will impact automotive, which is a huge industry. So it's really just the mere existence of the DARPA challenge and the fact that Velodyne stuck some LiDARs on there.
Yeah, to me, it's that after that one Velodyne in the DARPA challenge, now we're tracking well over 100 startups in the space. And it depends how you count it. Some people say it's about 100, some 300, depends on if you go down to the subsystem level or you're looking at the whole LiDAR. But let's just say it's easily in the hundreds of companies out there that are making LiDAR, which is a device that, again, did not exist in the automotive industry until recently. So, and again, for an industry that's used to typically buying from tier one suppliers, to see all these startups come in, that in itself, it's extremely exciting and very, very novel because we're typically used to buying from your usual tier one suppliers like Bosch and Conti and Aptiv. And all of a sudden, we're all looking at these scrappy startups, some of them two guys in a garage with an idea. And to even for the automotive industry to consider them, it's been an absolutely dramatic change.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us to our next question pretty well. By the end of this quarter, there should be at least 5 publicly traded LiDAR companies: Innoviz, Ava, Ouster, Velodyne, and Luminar. So SPACs are obviously great for companies going to market before they meet traditional milestones or pre-revenue startups. But with a combined $20 billion market cap and by targeting a number of these same customers, what's your take on whether these LiDAR companies are valued too ambitiously? Dragos, do you want to go first?
there's definitely a market for that, and I think it shows more than anything else the amount of money that's needed to develop this kind of technology to the point where you can put it in every vehicle, in every corner of the car. So I think part of the bet that people are making is, at least one of them is going to make it. We probably don't know yet which one, but each one of them needs that kind of money to develop this technology. So it's definitely a race. Could it be a bubble? Maybe, probably. But then again, look at what happened with fiber communication in the 90s. It in the beginning we thought we need enormous pipes, and then it kind of crashed when we realized we didn't need them, and then all of a sudden there were enough applications for that, and it picked up again. So I think it's going to be similar to that, where right now we're pretty, no pun intended, laser focused on one application. Sorry about that. And not all of these five is going to survive, or at least have the right returns. But there will be applications later on that we're not even thinking of today, and developing the technology will enable these other applications to appear.
Should I chime in?
If you have something to add, that'd be great. Sure.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I can't disagree with anything Drago says. I'd like to disagree with conflict. But the thing that I'll add though, and look, as Voyant hopes to be in this race, I'm ecstatic that there's 20 billion in market cap from companies that haven't really fielded any substantial product and haven't really generated any substantial revenue. I think it's outstanding. But it is a little interesting that, there's 20 billion in market cap from companies with essentially de minimis revenue. Like Luminar is trading, I just looked it up, it's something like 600 times 2020 revenue, 600 times 2020 revenue, not earnings, that was negative, revenue. And the numbers are a little aggressive. I mean, as a VC, I see a lot of pitches with aggressive growth for whatever sector the company's pitching. And these are some extremely aggressive claims for growth over the next 4 years. It's hard to understand how 4 or 5 or maybe 7 companies are going to achieve those. Very tricky.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's so true. And it reminds me of our conversation earlier this week about how there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the LiDAR sector right now. And there's a big difference between making a few thousand units per year or over the history of the company and millions of units per year. And a lot of these startups may be being valued as the latter. So from your view on this and from your experience in the sector, which existing startups have fielded products at scale so far compared to their valuations?
Should I
Sure, go ahead, Peter.
Well, I think that's something you can just look at. The very exciting thing about this SPAC revolution is that you have publicly available information. So just going to the IPO pitches for these companies, you see that Velodyne, which isn't the most valued company in the space so far, but they clearly have the most revenue. They posted something like 100 million, on the order of $100 million in revenue for last year, compared to essentially zero for anybody else. They've made, if you do the math and kind of dive into their specs, you get to an estimate of about 45,000 units sold over the history of the company, with about a few thousand a year, like 5 or 15,000 a year, depending on which year and which products you look at. And that's what you've got. You've got 3 billion in market value for 15,000 units sold a year. It's all right out there on the internet.
Absolutely. And as Kyle Vogt recently noted on Twitter, which was a pretty popular thread that I'm sure we all saw, these startups appear to overlap. The 5 that we're talking about here that are going public or have already gone public by the end of this quarter appear to overlap in 3 places, according to their public pitches. So they all target ADAS or robo-taxis as a key revenue driver. They're all offering value-added software for perception. And they're all, of course, banking on the fact that LiDAR adoption is going to balloon. For both of you, what are they right about? What are they wrong about? And what should they be thinking twice about?
Yeah, so I do think that we do have a lot of applications in ADAS, definitely more than in full autonomy level 4. Level 4 is probably the sexier application, but ADAS has the market volume. And as we all kind of push each other, and as the market forces push us and the consumers push us, there will certainly be a need for more LiDAR in vehicles. What it's, I wouldn't say they get it wrong, but the level of software development will definitely vary with each automaker. So some of us would like to develop a lot more software ourselves. Some of us will prefer the LiDAR provider to provide that software. So there are different levels of that software development that we would want to come in with the device. The other thing is the integration with the other sensors. So some of them are looking at integrating the LiDAR with cameras or with radar. Others are looking at just doing the LiDAR itself. Again, it depends who your final customers will be and what their needs are. Ultimately, we're driven by cost. We're driven by size and power. And the only way to really, in my opinion, to get the cost down is to go into that solid state format, which right now there's nobody out there making them. There's like Voyant, it's still on being tested, and hopefully there will be a product like Voyant that's going to be a solid state device that you can easily put in the corner of the vehicle and you can buy it for a few $100s.
And yeah, so to add to that, well, I was just going to say what they got right, what all the competitors got right was they have these devices, they can make things for a few $1,000s, maybe more. Where can I find an exploding large scale market to justify making a few $1,000 sensors? And the only viable candidate for that market would be automotive. And, will LiDAR explode? Of course it'll explode, just like CMOS cameras exploded. But, we had, if you go back to the early 90s when you had CCD cameras or something, they were like $5,000 shoe boxes. Where can I put CCD cameras? It wasn't everywhere. When we had the CMOS sensor, which was adopted in late 1990s, by the early 2000s, everyone had forgotten what other kind of camera technologies there was, and CMOS had replaced everything. The same thing could happen with LiDAR. It's hard to see how if you're making $5,000 shoe boxes, you can go to this completely different technology and succeed. But if you have the $5,000 shoe box, the only place it can go is automotive. And that part they've definitely got right. And that's hard, by the way. Like getting any kind of thing in the automotive supply chain is a very, very tricky problem. And they've gotten that right.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us to the fact that we focus a lot of the LiDAR conversation on vehicles, since that's obviously, as you just mentioned, a huge scale win at low margins. But as we all know, the applications for this tech go far beyond the individual automotive market and robo-taxis. So construction, delivery bots, factory automation, and consumer appliances. What will it take, in your view, for us to see these sensors in consumer hardware like smart TVs, for example?
Yeah, so before I even address that last question, I think to me, the really exciting part is that the research we in the automotive industry have done for the last 5-6 years or so, maybe 10, has driven the technology into being affordable into other industries. So like I said, construction, mining, agriculture, delivery bots. Anecdotally, one time I was at, when we could have VC cocktail parties, there was this one CEO that came to me, and I didn't know who she is. And she's like, thank you. And I'm like, for what? And who are you? So it turns out she was the CEO of a startup that does construction robots to lay drywall. And she was thanking me as a representative of the automotive industry that we drove the cost of LiDAR so low that now she can afford it to put on every robot that she has to lay drywall. So it is exciting that you have this leakage of technology from one to another. I guess the way it was used to leak from NASA into more consumer applications. But yeah, to make it into consumer devices, you need to bring the size and cost even lower. But it's getting there, right? We have it in our iPhone 12s right now, and it's easy to to see how that can propagate into other applications. And there are cameras that can track you with infrared to know exactly the depth and know where to focus. We're putting cameras inside the vehicle to Peter's point, that as they're getting cheaper and better, you can now put them inside the vehicle and see what the passengers are doing without actually seeing them. So you maintain their privacy while still being able to deduce what's going on for safety and privacy. So there are a lot of applications that are starting to come out of all this research that we've been doing.
Yeah, and I think so. The conversation that we'd had before was that, as the cost of these sensors comes down, like I was building $400,000 LiDAR systems in the 90s, and before the DARPA challenge, you could buy maybe a $40,000 industrial LiDAR from a few companies. Velodyne and the current crop of competitors have brought that down to $4,000. So, and they're all trying to get to $400, and maybe they will. Maybe there's a new technology that can come in with a product at $400, and maybe there's new technologies that come out in the next few years that bring it down to $40. Voyant hopes to be in that race as well. So when you have a perception stack or a sensing platform that can really sense its environment accurately in 3D in all lighting conditions for $40, well, where can't you put it? So Samsung tried TVs, and a bunch of high-end TVs tried to put cameras in as a human-machine interface device. Creepy, hackable, had to shut it down, take it out. Infrared, spectral light, LiDAR. I mean, as silly as this may be, but the LiDARs that could go in front of your car to help you drive it autonomously or safely might also be in your house for the simple and really silly application of just waving your hands in Minority Report to change your channels and having a built-in AR gaming system in your home. To say nothing of like autonomous field robotics that right now are very expensive, that then the perception stack on those machines drops from a current price of say 10 grand down to like $100. You could have automated luggage driving around in the airport. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but think about how silly it is to have an SLR quality camera in your phone, in your pocket. That's also silly to me, but I'm old.
Yeah, one thing I would add, because Peter's statement kind of triggered another thought, is I'm seeing in the relatively near future, with the advent of very low power AI chips, that combination between the imager and the AI chip right behind it. So the idea is right now we have all this stream of data that comes out. We feed it to some decently big computers. We extract information from it with AI inference. We're already starting to see that those chips are getting so small in terms of size and power that you can put them right behind the imager. You can package them into a tiny camera. And now even consumer grade cameras can give you inference that they can tell you what's going on in that scene, and therefore be used for security. They can be used to calm down your cats and dogs or God knows what. But it's getting down to the point where you can start doing silly things.
And by silly, of course, I mean massively scalable.
Yes.
I don't mean silly in a bad way. Like we have lots of really interesting applications for, Voyant's technology, for example, but, someday I hope that it's in basically every consumer appliance in your house, your smart TV, your washer dryer, your stereo system. And we're actually talking to customers like that. So, it does sound silly, but the real reason for having those conversations is to sell hundreds of millions of LiDAR devices.
Absolutely. And no, I think that's a really important point. Do you see anything on the horizon that could potentially make these startups irrelevant in the near future? And also what's the timeline for industry consolidation given the number of startups working in this space? So yeah, basically thinking 5 years out, do you see, as we were just talking about, kind of the trajectory of industry consolidation here? And do you also see any kind of dark horse coming on the horizon that could make these startups irrelevant with, for example, a $400 or $40 sensor that ends up being mass produced and kind of takes the consumer appliance market by storm?
So the way so on the timeline part on the consolidation, the way I split all these 100+ LiDAR companies, it's sort of in 3 buckets, is that with the right solution, the right now solution, and the in between. So the right now solution is the optomechanical ones, Velodyne, Ouster, Hesse. I honestly think that it's hard to bring the cost down if you have an optomechanical system because of manufacturing. The right solution is solid state because you can get on that exponential curve of silicon and software. And just like everything, when you get on that curve, becomes exponentially cheaper each year. I think that's where we're going to head, but we don't have a product yet. And then in between, you have sort of the MEMS ones, which are kind of in between technology. So each one of the right now and the in between, I think they'll get one generation, and then eventually we'll move to solid state. In terms of what could disrupt this, I'm seeing a fusion. So right now we're separating it very clearly between LiDAR, radar, and cameras, and we're fusing them in some main computer that we have in the vehicle. What I'm starting to see signals that's happening is fusion at the hardware level, the physics level, where you can fuse a camera and a LiDAR. So maybe you have illumination with lasers, and then you have a CMOS reader, or you can have a radar front end and LiDAR front end, and you bring them together and read them together. So that kind of combination, when you start almost ignoring the wavelength they're operating at and becoming devices that are connected, and you can see a very broad spectrum of wavelengths, I think that could disrupt the separation between different technologies.
I think I'll tackle the consolidation question first because it's easier for me. With the explosion in SPAC IPOs, it's actually really hard to see how there'll be a consolidation for any of the companies you already mentioned. There are already, hundreds of millions of dollars of pre-IPO money went into these companies. They're now valued at billions of dollars. They're all roughly the same level of market cap. It's hard to see the synergies between multiple $5 billion companies combining when they have no market and no product. It's just hard to see the synergies. So I think the SPACs make it harder for consolidation. Of course, we're in a new world. Who knows? I could be completely wrong. Maybe SPACs make it easier. By the way, there's a great vision. The SPAC IPO thing is really incredible, and it's really driving this industry. All of the IPOs are through a SPAC merger of some kind. There was a great visualization in the Wall Street Journal just yesterday showing these like little bubbles, show like one bubble, like one SPAC, one SPAC, one SPAC for every quarter. And in the last like few weeks, there have been hundreds, and they're expected to be about 300 SPAC IPOs, not just in LiDAR, but of course in everything. But I mean, that's very interesting and a little bit strange to me. So I don't think there'll be any consolidation. I think at least not in a financially good way for the shareholders of those companies. And in terms of technologies that make this thing, make this whole industry flip over, well, yeah, I mean, we hope, Voyant hopes to be one of those technologies, and I live in fear that some other technology will get to the market or be better first. There's radar, there's a whole bunch of technologies, both in the visual, in active sensing, both radar and LiDAR. There's lots of different approaches. The approaches that, as Drago said, that we have now, the optomechanical, probably hits a dead end, but all those companies say that they have follow-on versions either for the MEMS or the final solid state. Everyone has proposed products that expect to come to market sometime in the next 5 years. I think we all live in fear of that new technology that makes everything irrelevant. And as working with LDV, I see these new technologies pop up and I'm rooting for them, but I'm also terrified as well.
Very relatable. Let's talk for a minute about LiDAR applications in vehicles that the audience may not hear discussed as often. So maybe in-car human-machine interaction, like waving your hand to signal you want the car window rolled down instead of pushing a button. Can either or both of you give some general examples that could be coming down the pipeline that you're excited about?
Yeah, and again, for in-vehicle, we're looking at driver monitoring systems. So if you have a level 3 autonomous vehicle, that means it can drive sometimes for you and sometimes you need to take over. Well, that transition from human to autonomous, it's easy. Going from autonomous to human, you need to make sure that the human is actually paying attention, that they're looking in the right direction. So we're looking at those applications. We're looking at even things like seat belts, whether you wear your seat belt or not, and what size you are. So the airbag deployment right now, it's based purely on weight, but it would be actually better if we knew, if are you in 200 pound guy wearing a t-shirt, or are you an 80-pound woman wearing a parka? All these things, and then the deployment of the airbags would be very different in those situations. Or, if you are a 100-pound 80-year-old or a 100-pound 18-year-old, in all these situations, the airbag deployment will be different. Leaving pets in cars or children in cars. If you do have a robo taxi, have you left your purse in the car by mistake, or maybe it's more nefarious and you left something more dangerous in the vehicle? All these things can certainly benefit from sensors in the vehicle that, again, can measure what's going on while maintaining your privacy. And then we have all kinds of applications in manufacturing where we're using these sensors to, as I alluded to, inspecting seats, inspecting engines, inspecting all kinds of parts that humans just can't do it fast enough or well enough.
Absolutely. And I also had a question for you, Dragos. Ford is upping its EV and AV investment to $29 billion and launching its self-driving commercial business in 2022. So now that you've reached the fourth generation of these vehicles, looking back, what can you point to that's concretely changed since that first generation? What progress, just in your view, have you personally seen?
I think honestly, everything has changed. From sensors that, again, are much more reliable. They can see further. They have higher resolutions, to the immense compute power that now we can put in vehicles, to all the algorithms that have been developed for AI and vision and machine learning to be able to process the world around us, to have this understanding of the perception around the vehicle, to the fact that it's attracting some of the best minds in the industry. Like it's actually a really cool thing to work on, and the talent actually wants to work in that on that application. Where, again, when I finished my PhD 20 years ago in this field, I wasn't able to do a startup in the space because nobody would have cared. So never mind that at that time it was mostly automated vehicles rather than autonomous. But to me, the interesting thing would be even the fifth generation, where that pendulum has swung from relying on the infrastructure to being completely independent of the infrastructure, to now we're talking about this happy medium where, because that intelligence is now also going into cities, and the cities want to become smarter for all kinds of other reasons, we can piggyback on that and have this really cool combination between autonomous vehicles and smart cities. And we don't have to do everything on the vehicle. A lot of that intelligence can be relied on what the cities are doing. So now you have this really nice combination between what the city sees and what the vehicle sees.
Absolutely. Can either of you think of a situation where, and we're heading back to kind of our first topic for a minute here, where multiple entrants went public on markets and products that won't exit for 4 years or more? Has that ever happened before now that you can think of?
The only case where a market went crazy in like a matter of months, or went very high in a matter of months from already traded entities, was this gold thing in Philippines in like 95 or 94, which ended with a couple of CFOs accidentally falling out of helicopters. It was very strange. That's one case, but no, I have a history in finance as well, and I can't recall a case where so many companies went public in a small industry in so short a time and achieved huge market capitalizations. I think that's a direct result of the money going to SPAC mergers.
Absolutely. And now that's our last prepared question, but I would love to take some audience questions. Our first one comes from Michael, and he was wondering if you two know of anyone that's collaborating with artists using LiDAR or other visual technologies right now. Totally fine if you aren't sure about that, but yeah, an interesting question.
I don't.
Go ahead.
Well, we have had some contact with some fashion people that had some really interesting applications around LiDAR, which I thought was intriguing, but unfortunately I don't have a LiDAR to give them yet. and they can't afford the $10,000 to buy a off-the-shelf LiDAR. So unless you have 10 grand to buy a LiDAR system right now, you kind of have to wait a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some startups that are trying to do something similar. Like if you want to virtually try new dresses or things like that. I've seen art installations that use 3D motion to know where the people are in the room, but we're not collaborating directly with them. But I can see the applications.
Absolutely. Another question from Jay. How much computing power is needed and how much IO to make use of all the LiDAR data? How does the vehicle afford all the computing?
Yeah, it's a major issue right now, to be honest. And for an electric vehicle, consuming all that power translates directly into reduced range. So it's definitely something we're working on. There are, in addition to the 100+ LiDAR companies, they are now, I'm tracking 60, so I assume there are more silicon, AI chip companies, startups that are trying to take on NVIDIA, claiming lower power. So it's possible that, again, out of these 60+, maybe there are also about 100 of them, that a few will actually come out and have lower power than NVIDIA, which is by far the leader right now. Of course, NVIDIA is not staying put. So the expectation is that all this competition will drive down significantly the cost and power consumption of machine learning chips.
Yeah, and the to add to that, so in a LiDAR-based perception system, you are pumping out, say, wall plug efficiency of like 20 watts to get like a long-range image out there, which is a lot from an automotive standpoint, 20 watts. Doesn't seem like a lot for a hairdryer, but it's a lot for sticking a component, one sensor into a car. But your compute goes way down because the compute requirements to do scene analysis from a LiDAR image versus a camera, where the cameras are essentially free, but you're paying a lot in wattage for a bunch of GPUs from NVIDIA, the compute drops from, say, 20 watts of CPU for a camera-based system down to 4 watts for GPU requirements from a three-dimensional scene analysis point of view. So and you may need both cameras and all those GPUs and everything. I'm not saying you get away with just LiDAR, but if you did, you're basically just shifting the power to an expensive LiDAR sensor, but away from the compute. Because essentially your compute requirements for most LiDAR scene analysis drops by like a factor of 5 or more. So it's a very interesting system analysis problem with like a rug, and you're constantly pushing on one part of the rug, but another bubble pops up. Maybe it's a smaller bubble. That's how you think about it.
Absolutely. We got a lot of great questions from the audience here, but I think we only have time for one more. For both of you, what is your current prediction for when 10% of all vehicles on the road, let's say in Manhattan, will be L4, L4 plus capable?
Oh man. Well,
a tough one.
Greg, are you allowed to comment on that? I think, do you have a conflict there where you can't even mention that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'll let you answer that one.
I figured Dragos wouldn't be able to answer that, but nothing from anything I've ever heard from Dragos. I used to meet with all of the perception stack people at all the different perception companies, and the front office might say one thing, oh, it'll all be happening, Tesla says it's already happening, everyone says it's happening next year, the year after, whatever. When you talk to the perception stack teams, they come up with all the edge cases where they need a certain level of reliability to really do this, and achieving those reliability levels are quite a bit out, regardless of what sensor stack you use. I mean, it's unfair because an autonomous car at any level has to essentially be 10 times safer or more than a human. It's not fair. We're making our robots be 10 times better than us. Hardly seems fair. We'll save a lot of people if we relax that constraint. Nevertheless, that is the design goal. And to achieve that design goal, it's going to take a long time. A long time. I mean, it's not happening in 5 years, unless we relax our safety requirements for these autonomous cars by a lot.
Great context. Thank you so much to you both, and great conversation. Excited to continue. If you have any questions for Peter and Dragos, feel free to continue asking on social media. Maybe they'll have time to respond. And thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Dragos. Thank you, Hayden, for such a great panel. There's so many amazing questions that are still in the chat.